Hello, everyone. Welcome to ICC's Game of the Week with your host, as always, Joel Benjamin. The traditional Reykjavik Open is still going strong with a host of big names competing in the Swiss System event. Two of the top prize winners, Pavel Elyanov and Wesley So, can be considered usual suspects. But the third, Bassem Amin, is something of a surprise. For the 24-year-old Egyptian GM, Reykjavik represents, in all likelihood, his biggest success to date. Now, it didn't look like much early on after a shock loss in round two that is short enough to actually show within this week's featured game. After beating a few low-rated players, Amin turned it on at the end. Anish Giri barely escaped with a draw in the endgame, but David Navarra went down in the penultimate round, and Grzegorz Gajewski in the finale, putting Amin on an impressive 8 out of 10. Now, Amin doesn't seem to know much theory, and he may not even be a full-time professional. His Wikipedia page reports that he was studying medicine. But the matchup with the extremely creative opening theoretician Gajewski might have been just what Amin needed. All right, let's get to it. Bassem Amin playing white and Gajewski playing black. And I said that Gajewski was an extremely creative opening theoretician. He introduced the Gajewski gambit, which is a pawn sacrifice in the Roy Lopez for black, similar to a martial attack, but in a position that nobody had ever considered it before. It was black beginning to play the Chigorin variation with knight a5 and then suddenly d5. And I think of that as one of the greatest opening novelties of all time. And it's not the only one he's come up with, but here he plays a Sicilian, of course, that Gajewski Gambit stuff he invented a few years back, and maybe has some new openings, or perhaps did this for this particular matchup, as Amin had been going through the tournament playing G3 on the third move, kind of turning a Sicilian into a King's Indian attack. Now, I think that this approach is rather toothless unless black has committed to e6. So if black plays e6 on move 2, white can play the immediate g6, or more common, white plays d3, so that on d5, white can play knight d2 or queen e2 to go into a King's Indian attack. But Gajewski was Amin was doing it in this tournament against almost any move. In fact, all three moves, d6, knight c6, and e6. Now, in round two, against Andrew Muir, the veteran Scottish player, he played against knight c6, he played g3. And look what happened to him. This game is short enough to actually show you the whole thing right here. Bishop g7, castles. And we see black employing a very favorable setup with putting the pawn on e5 and the knight on e7, because with the center blocked, the advance of f pawn, the levers become very important, and white will still have to move his knight out of the way to get his f pawn going. So then we see bishop e3, castles. D4 is usually not effective because black can take with the e-pawn, and now he's got a pin on the d-pawn. He could play something like bishop g4 here. So after castles, white plays knight h4, bishop e6, knight d2, queen d7, f4, rook a c8. Actually looks like a slightly strange move to me. Knight df3, h6, guard g5, queen d2, king h7, f5. Now, check out what happens here. Amin makes a terrible oversight. And now knight takes e5, overlooking that in this position, he doesn't have he doesn't have bishop e4, because black can just take it and give check on f3 and get the queen back. So he basically just blundered a piece, and a move after doing so resigned. So a 19 move loss to a low rated player in the second round. But you can say tomorrow is another day, and that's the approach that Amin took, and he shrugged it off, won some games, and got himself right back in the tournament. Now in this game, Gajewski plays d6, and it continues in similar fashion with g3, bishop g2, and now Gajewski plays knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Now, as I just showed before, I think the most effective setup for black is the one with the knight going to e7 after e5, as black has these options of playing f5. Also, the knight is not blocking the bishop's diagonal, so it gives black more direct pressure on d4. But even so, this works out pretty well for black. Now, perhaps he felt that if he played g6, that white might transpose into a dragon variation. Although I don't think that it would have been very likely for Amin to do that, since he wasn't playing any open Sicilians at all in the tournament. Also, perhaps white can try to play c3 in that position, as black doesn't have time to play both bishop g7 and e5, but I'm not sure that it's such a great threat for white to play d4 so quickly anyway, as black can possibly resort to a different approach, like perhaps bishop g4 here. But in any case, knight f6, d3, g6, castles, bishop g7, c3. So white is looking to build a center. I think actually that knight c3 might actually be a more promising approach. Basically, white will play it like a king's English, like he's playing the black side against an English, and we see that this is just a very common position there. But he actually has an extra tempo. Usually, the black position would be white, and black would get to as white would get to play rook b8, and there knight d5 is perhaps the most solid way to play. But here white can also think about h3, bishop e3, and queen d2, and go for kingside attack. That's a setup that I used very effectively circa 1980, playing in Bill Goichberg's 15-minute handicap events against the likes of Tony Miles and Yasser Seirawan. That really kind of takes me back. But Amin, I think, tends to play these positions with c3. It's a creature of habit, and there he goes. Castles. Now, I think strategically the move c5 to c4 is very interesting, because if black makes the trade of these pawns, then white is frustrated in building up the big center. So I think strategically that's nice. But this is a slight tactical problem that after d takes c4, knight takes e4, knight d4, hitting the knight and also looking through to this knight on c6. I think that white gets an advantage there. So black instead just castles. Rook e1 defends e4 and gets ready to play d4. Now, black doesn't want to just sit around and let white do that. I think, for instance, a move like rook b8, I wouldn't like to let white just play d4 so easily. But in addition to the move played, I think bishop g4 also makes sense. The idea is that if you trade off that bishop, then you get more pressure on d4. And I think that white should bring the knight over first in order to have more control of d4. And black can play something like knight d7, or he could do it on the next move. It doesn't matter that much. And now play b5. And now with the long diagonal open, this queenside pawn attack with b4 can be very annoying. I have quite a bit of experience in this structure, not so much with the bishop on g2, but it's on record that I played a lot of anti-Sicilians with bishop c4 and with bishop d3 to c2. So I usually have this position with the bishop here or here, and I know that pawn attack with b4 can actually be quite annoying with the long diagonal open. And if white were to play d4, I think that black would refrain from an exchange on d4, perhaps play something like queen b6 here. But I think e5 is a good move for black, even with knight on f6. It just frustrates white's play in the center. If he plays d4 now, black can take there, and actually has a choice here because he could certainly play bishop g4. Looks to be a reasonable move, forcing white to do something in the center, or he could just take again on d4 and look for active play. Knight g4 is kind of a tricky move. F2 is not that well defended. Maybe queen b6 will be coming with some tactics. So white certainly has to be aware of the activity of the black pieces. Certainly actually seems to be Amin's style to play a little bit more slowly and build up. He seems to be a strategical player and would not want to blast open the position. So he plays a3, okay, and we see this as a common move in the King's Indian attack, looking for some wing play with b4. Makes a lot more sense after black plays e5, blocking the long diagonal. But it's always been my feeling that that this doesn't really affect the position all that much. It makes something happen, but not enough to really bother black too much. I don't think that black should play a5 to stop b4. It's just not necessary. And then white can play a4. This is a typical kind of positional trick that we see in a lot of different King's Indian type openings. And after that move, the knight can come out. White has control of b5 and c4. Nice light square control, and it can start dancing a bit with those knights. Although even in that position, black may be quite okay. It would be my preference actually to just ultimately look for d5. I think h6 is certainly a useful move, preventing anything from coming to g5, and so bishop e6 becomes a candidate move. And after b4, I think it might be worthwhile to play a6 and keep that knight from being chased away with b5. And I think ultimately black will be able to play d5 at some moment. Rook e8 could be a good prep move, maybe even bishop e6. And okay, if black has to take on b4 at some moment to do that and to play d5, I think that's okay. So that's probably where I would go with the black position. Although what Gajewski did is also quite reasonable. Black probably has to go very wrong to be too far from equality in such a quiet position. He plays b5. So white plays h3. Now black is looking for space on the queen side, but as I said, the actual attack on the c3 pawn is not that significant with the long diagonal block. So white isn't really too worried about b4. And really black has to play some prep moves to threaten it, because you never really want to play b4 in the position where you're forced to take with a c-pawn, as white gets a lot of central influence, which is going to be good for the middle game. So h3 prepares d4 by preventing bishop g4 and also getting ready to play bishop e3. So there's no knight g4. Rook b8, bishop e3, a5. So black has played 3 moves in a row on the queen side, and now white is getting in position to play d4. Finally, a developing move and d4. So white's position has been solidified quite a bit in the last few moves. as bishop coming to e3 and knight d2, two pieces developed, knight g4 and bishop g4 both prevented. So I think that now after these exchanges in the center, I think that white has just a slight pull here with a better pawn structure. It's not necessarily that big a deal. The knight on d2 is perhaps not optimally placed, but the bishop on d4 is certainly a good piece. And because of that, black could certainly consider knight d7 to trade it. I think that would help to neutralize whatever slight thing that white has in the position. Although Gajewski may have felt that in trading the bishops, and the white knight would maybe replace the bishop something like this and bring the knight to d4, and that piece would be greatly improved. And then the move queen d7 actually looks a bit awkward after queen f3, as black can't move the knight to the central square with d7. He can move it to e8 or h5, again offering this trade, and probably again the position is close to equal, although the knight looks a bit awkward on the g7 square. Now we don't know exactly what Gajewski was thinking about this. Both players needed to win in order to catch the leaders, who are Elyanov and Wesley So, who I believe immediately drew their game. So Gajewski was perhaps thinking that he wanted to go hard for a win in this game, and if that perhaps might have affected some decisions that he made. He decided to play queen e7, losing a tempo, giving white this free move queen f3, but perhaps it's not that significant. Even so, Amin starts to get some activity going, hits the pawn on a5, and when it moves, he jumps in here to a5, threatening a fork on c6. Okay, so if black just defends that, rook b c8, something like rook c1, and perhaps rook fe8. Now, knight c6 doesn't necessarily make anything happen directly, because when the queen moves, it counterattacks the knight on c6. But it seems that white is building up some pressure, maybe even a maneuver to the b4 square could be interesting. So knight c6 and knight b4, just to put the knight on a more solid square. I think also queen d3 to coax that queen to d6 and then play g4. The knight on f6 now is strangled for squares. The computer doesn't register this as a significant advantage for white, but I would say that there's a little pressure. It just looks slightly uncomfortable for black. So Gajewski decided to go for some exchanges here, take the knights off the board, and rook e d1. Now you might say, well, why the e rook to d1 and not the one that's undeveloped? Well, I think the idea is that in this position, the queen is looking at the rook on e1. So if white plays rook a d1, he wouldn't be able to lift the rook without the rook hanging. So I think he's figuring that he's going to move this rook up and double on the d line. So that's why it makes sense to play rook e d1. Rook b6, white trades. And now rook d4. I think this is an inexact move, a move played on feel. But I think queen f4 provides more concrete problems. Actually, black is not really in position to defend this pawn on d6. If rook d8, e5 creates lots of tactical problems. Black can't take queen e5 check, and he's going to lose material. And can't play d5 either because of queen f6 check. So e5, black is immediately in big trouble. So I think a pawn sacrifice could be in the cards, something like rook c8. And if white goes ahead and grabs his pawn, you might see queen d8. Now looking for that endgame, salvation, the ending, when the pawn majority on the king side for white is not quite as meaningful. In the middle game, it can actually lead to an attack for white. But in this position, black is hoping to get some counterplay on the white pawns, but still, white can play bishop f1, attacking b5, rook d4, and now computer recommends king g2 here, although I think that bishop takes b5 would have to be considered as well. And if bishop takes h3, then perhaps rook e1, and the rook is in position to defend the second rank with rook e2. Okay, white is a pawn up, and well, actually pawn up with I think better chances than he got in the game, because I think he's going to be able to maintain an extra pawn on the queen side. After rook d4, black plays rook c8, rook a d1, and now rook c2. And this move is mistimed. Still doesn't get black into big trouble yet, but it would be better to play b4 to go for that counterplay right away. One of the reasons being that it opens up the queen right away to go to some of these squares along the fifth rank, and gets immediate pressure on the white pawns. And funnily enough, as you start calculating the position, it seems that that black is perfectly fine, maybe even at least equal, definitely seemingly against the run of play, as I don't really like the way that black has played. It seems that he's lost time at various moments, but after this move, he gets pressure on the queen side, and it has to be noted that that the moment the white rooks leave the first rank, that his king becomes more exposed. The black bishop on e6 is actually helping, doing a better job as a defender against rook incursions than the white bishop on g2. As an example, if white takes on d6, see a trade, takes, pawn takes, and now black can invade. Rook c3 might be slightly more accurate than rook c2 right away. Well, black is poised to get this pawn in f2, so position starting to work in black's favor there. Also, if white answers b4 with queen f4, black can trade pawns and now kick that queen away with g5, as the queen is now defending over there. And again, black is quite comfortable. So it just goes to show that you know, in this type of quiet position, you can play moves that might not look that right, but there'll still be opportunities later with exact play. But rook c2 does definitely give the advantage to white after queen f4. The problem is that black can't really carry out this threat to take b2 as white plays e5. Now grabbing a substantial initiative. Black can't take on e5 because if queen takes e5, well, the problem isn't even any veiled threats to the rook on b2. It's just that black is getting mated, either rook coming to the back rank or to h4, or f6 opens up this check here, and there's no way to defend f7. So white just wins outright. e5 black has, of course, not to take on e5, but white would have a very large advantage. So rook takes c2 is out, but now b4 happens, and even though it loses a pawn, it still might be in time. Yeah, black can't take back the pawn on b2, again because of the check. But you know, part of being a grandmaster is having a second layer of defense and realizing that when things are starting to go down, that you can play a move like Queen C5 and try to trade down and whittle the material on the board and try to get a draw in that fashion. And it seems that Black actually still has enough to hold the draw. And he follows a basic principle that our viewers should take note of, that when you're pawn down, it's very often a good idea, a good strategy to try to trade off all the pawns on the far side of the board. And if you can limit it to just pawns on one side, in this case, let's say White's 4 against Black's 3 on the king side, that is often enough to draw. And it's very hard for White to prevent this liquidation. Of course, if Black can safely take b2, he gets a pass pawn on the a file. So Rook a1, and now Bishop b3 defending a4. But I think that Black actually had even more direct approach. He could have put the bishop on d7. And if White goes to defend this pawn, he can go back to e6, looking to come into a2. If something like b5, bishop a2, rook a1, rook takes b2, I don't think that White is going to be able to do better than something like b6 and just trading off the b pawn for the a pawn. Black can retreat the bishop and then take the b pawn, and that position should be, with all pawns on one side, I think should be a theoretical draw. Black still could have gotten something like that with bishop b3, e5, bishop c6, and at first it looks like White is going to go up 2 pawns, and that could be the game. But actually, I don't think White can hold on to that to his b pawn with best play. Now Black can play bishop a2 just to not let White take the pawn with the rook, and well, it could be dangerous for White if that pawn gets to a3. At the very least, Black is going to be able to trade the pawns anyway. So White can play bishop takes a4, but now Black can retreat the bishop, and White is not in a good position to do anything about the b pawn. If he pushes it, Black could play bishop d7, or if he's greedy, he might even try to take the h pawn first, because the bishop on a4 certainly isn't well placed. But again, we're headed for 4 on 3, which I think should be drawn. Gajewski actually plays this part of the game quite poorly. I don't know enough about his games to say if the endgame is a weak point for him, but he did not excel in this one, although it has to be noted that a couple rounds earlier, he had beaten one of the tournament favorites, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, in a long ending, a rook ending with an extra pawn, and he got the job done there as a superior side, but he gets a taste of his own medicine in the last round. Now he plays the move f6, and it certainly is sensible to want to make this trade. Indeed, a 3 on 2, for instance, we would get a 3 on 2 if White made a capture on f6. A 3 on 2 is a lot easier to draw than a 4 on 3. In fact, in a rook ending, 3 on 2, with these 3 against these 2, that ending is considered so dead drawn that when I reached that position against Garry Kasparov with the 2 pawns against the 3 pawns, he didn't even make an attempt to win the game. Not that he respects me any more than other players out there, but he just felt it would be a waste of time to try. The problem here is that there's a lot going on the rest of the board, and Amin doesn't take on f6. He takes on a4. Now, here, Gajewski retreats the bishop to e6, attacking this pawn, and again figuring that he'd be able to get that b pawn back if white plays b5. He can at some point attack it with the bishop and trade off that it won't be that dangerous. But then comes bishop c6, and that puts a dilemma for black. Now, I suppose in this position, it's also possible to take on e5 right away, but I suppose that white would have moved the bishop, and it would have led to a similar position that black could have gotten on the same on the next move. So bishop b6, bishop c6, and now I think Gajewski again made a poor decision, as the way he played just seems like a technical win for white. He could play f takes e5 here. White could give a check, and I think king f6 I like better than putting the king on the side, even though the h-pawn is hanging. White is not likely to take that pawn right away, as with all the pawns on the same side of the board, I don't think that there's a lot of winning chances here. Now white could hold on to the pawn with b5. Now with the bishop on c6 instead of a4, it's much more serious, as that piece isn't out of play. Black could trade another pawn with bishop h3, and I don't know how to evaluate white's winning chances here. I don't think it's going to be easy to get that b pawn through. On the other hand, given that black could have had a position with all the pawns on the same side of the board, I think that I would be a little bit more nervous about the position for black with that b pawn. Maybe white will be able to do something. Maybe white could put the rook on the b file and try to directly advance that pawn. That could be a dangerous plan. So I don't know, maybe Gajewski was going to go in that direction at first when he played f6 and changed his mind. But in any case, rook takes b4 just leads to big problems after rook a7. Now he's just in danger of being down too many pawns. After the check, he gets the pawn taken on f6. So certainly it shows that the plan with f6 was kind of a disaster, as it just ended up giving away a pawn there. All right, so rook b6 hitting the bishop. And now if the bishop retreats to g2 to defend everything, black can play rook check and get a counterattack going on this f2 pawn. And I think that makes the white win problematic, maybe not even possible, as white may have to give up this one, and then the pawn on f6 could drop after that. But we see a better move here, bishop e4, so that the king can hop up to g2, keep the f-pawn protected, and bishop h3 just amounts to a trade of h-pawns, bishop f5. So white managed to keep a two-pawn advantage, and basically a two-pawn advantage is a dividing line. With all the pieces on the same side of the board, one pawn, usually not enough to win, but two extra pawns will be. So the bishops have gone off. By the way, I could mention that that in this discussion of the 4-on-3, there are possibilities of rook endings and bishop endings. Most players know that rook endings tend to be drawish. Rooks are drawish pieces. An extra pawn is often not enough to win in a rook ending. But bishops are actually drawish pieces too if the pawns are all on the same side of the board. So a 4-on-3 with bishops is usually going to be drawn. Usually the weaker side's king is going to be able to sit in front of a pawn somewhere on a square not of the color of the bishops, and progress will not be made. But in any case, we're in this rook ending, and Gajewski is now in a heap of trouble. White plays f7, and that's a move that certainly it's hard to argue with. But I think even simply king g2 is enough to win, because after rook takes f6, king f3, the white king is bolting into action, getting ready to take off this pawn, and the black king is cut off on the first rank, so it can't come to defend. And as we shall see later, the king and pawn endings are hopeless for black. So if black, let's say, moves the rook away and tries to counterattack, white can move this pawn up here. And I don't see what black can do because white is going to be in a position to just attack the f-pawn with the rook and take it off and then have two extra pawns, a very trivial win. So actually king g2 looks like the simplest win, although I think that we would have been somewhat deprived as the way the game went is actually more educational. But white played f7. Now, the idea is that if black wants to take this pawn, he will have to trade rooks, and that will lead to a pawn ending. Now, if you have an extra pawn, the pawn ending is usually the ideal for you, as most cases you can force a win with an extra pawn in a pawn ending. Of course, there are exceptions. If you're down to one pawn against nothing and the king is in front of it, as we shall see. But in this case, black cannot enter this pawn ending. Now, the position is actually winnable in a lot of different ways. I think even g4, as one of my students suggested when I showed this position, is good enough, as white can get to a position where the king will lead and the f-pawn will stay back, and white will get opposition that way. For instance, king f6, something like this, and f3. Typical position, the black king forced to one side, and white wins, as you can find in any textbook. But actually the easiest way to win, in my opinion, what I would do, I would keep some pawns on for comfort, is just bring the king. And doesn't matter if black zigs, as white has a reserve pawn move. Black will have to step aside, and then after f4, the f5 pawn will drop from zugzwang, and if black goes after g3, well, he's just not going to get back. The f-pawn will queen directly. So the pawn ending is not possible for black now. But I think he made a nice move here, rook g6, looking to do some liquidation, and after king h2, f4. Now, it would be foolish for white to take on f4 because two f-pawns are not worth one g-pawn. He already has an f-pawn, and having another one is not going to help. In fact, I don't think that there's any way that white can make any progress. The rook on the third rank, well, actually black can go and take off this one, and then the rook can come back to the third rank for a kind of Philidor's defense, a third rank defense, and I don't think having the f-pawn, extra f-pawn is going to help, especially with this pawn advanced too far already. Yeah, okay, for a strong player, it makes no sense really to take on f4, but for those less advanced players watching, it just shows the number of pawns is not what means everything. Sometimes you have to think about the quality of pawns, and white would rather have the g-pawn, potential winner. Okay, now again we can think about pawn endings. If black attacks the pawn, white has to make sure not to play g4 because you don't want to advance the pawn in front of your king. When you're trying to win by getting the opposition, you need to lead with the king. And here, if black takes the pawn, we see a typical drawn position. Although rather shockingly, one of my chess engines gave white a two-pawn advantage in this position, even at depth 50. I don't understand how it could take that many moves to see. This is a trivial draw, of course, with the king sitting in front, having the opposition. So white has to avoid that prospect, but a better move is king h4, and if takes, then you get the king out in front and win easily. Well, Gajewski actually comes up with a clever trap. He plays rook a6 and then g4, and now rook a1. And I think this is a really nice trap because if white plays king g3, which looks like a natural move, after rook f1, it seems that the win is already gone because now black is threatening to take the pawn in f7 because the white pawn is too far advanced. The king can't get out in front of it. The only way to get out in front would be king h4, but then you lose the rook and then black wins. And white is denied the f4 square for the king. So this would actually draw. So it's a very easy mistake to make, but Amin avoids it, doubling back king g2. And when black plays rook a3, cutting the king, he goes to f2. He gets the king off the g file, and now he's threatening to advance the pawn. If g5 right away, that would be a blunder. Rook a5, g6, he has rook g5 check, getting that pawn. And if rook h5, with a little trick here, winning the rook, black just simply moves the rook closer, and next move, he can actually take that with the king, again with a draw. So white gets the king off the file, and now there's a genuine threat to play g5 because that pawn gets all the way to g6. Even if black attacks it, white doesn't have to worry about it because then he will have rook h8, queening the pawn because the f7 pawn will be defended. So in this case, just advancing the pawn without the king is a big threat. So black tries to stop that. Of course, if g5, he's going to go rook g4. But white just plays king g3. Okay, and now if rook a1, with some ideas as before, I think g5 is again a blunder because of rook f1, threatening the pawn, and g6, there's rook g1 check. But white would not advance the pawn. Now white has to move king f4, a route to get in front. And so if rook f1, king g5, again, the pawn ending is winning. So let's say black tries check, king h4, check, up, check, and now king h5. So white has put the king in position so that he can block lateral checks with pawn g5. And if black comes down, he can simply play g5 because check on the h file, king g6 protects. And of course, this is again another winning pawn ending as the g pawn just scoots in. So actually, black is becoming without hope here as it becomes clear that the white winning plan, there's just nothing to do about it. He tries king e7, I guess, with some hopes that if the f pawn is defended, rook h8 won't be a check, and maybe he'll get an extra move to do something, but not really. Rook a1, and now there's nothing wrong with the move g6 if white wants to go for that, as he can easily hide from checks. He could come in to g7 with the king, wins easily. But Amin decided to play king g6 instead. And on rook f1, he again has a choice. King g7 is certainly good enough, getting ready to push this pawn. And if rook f7, then again black will be forced into this rook trade, and the g pawn will queen. But Amin just decided just to do it a slightly different way. He played rook h8, threatening rook e8 check and f8. And again, if rook takes f7, rook h7 forces that decisive trade. So after rook h8, Gajewski resigned. So actually a game really, I think, where he had lots of chances to make a draw even after being somewhat outplayed and being down a pawn, there often are a lot of chances to draw even when you're behind in the end game, but not real good defense from the black side. And Amin was able to squeeze it out, a very big win, getting to 8 points and a tie for first. So we'll see if this a young Egyptian player will be able to build on this. He is already 26-31, so he's certainly an established player, but not at all a household name. Certainly a big tournament victory here. All right, well that about does it. I'm Joel Benjamin. As always, it's a pleasure to bring this show to you. I hope that you enjoyed that game, and I hope that you'll join me next time on ICC's Game of the Week.